everybody. This is Conrad Aggermont, CEO here at Agile IT. Thanks for joining us for another Agile IT Tech Talk. Today we've brought on a repeat visitor and friend of ours, Rich Carlsen from Microsoft, who's a Microsoft Solutions Architect. And for today, we really wanted to talk about the topic around application modernization, which really, Rich, seems like a very broad topic, and this can seems to span lots of different people, both from application developers, managers, people that do tests, kind of the place where you a lot of times think around application modernization, but it really also impacts what we do on the IT perspective. Together, thinking about the strategy of what you need to move up there, it's can be overwhelming. There's lots of different tools to do it, lots of different schools of thought. At least here we wanted to start that conversation, and Rich is really going to guide us through kind of setting that stage, and then the thing that I always love are demos. So he has some cool things in store for us. So with that, Rich, why don't you kind of take it away and get us going?
Okay, great. If you can make me a presenter, I will do so.
Do I need like a sword and like you are now with a presenter?
All right. You guys see the screen?
Yep.
All right. Hey. This is Rich Carlsen here. And again, I'm a Cloud Solutions Architect at Microsoft on the Applications and Infrastructure team. It means I have a fairly broad scope when it comes to Azure. Touch a lot of points on that. And today our topic is application modernization strategies on Azure. And it's all about moving workloads. What I have up on my screen right now is a pictorial of a real world cloud journey. The important things to look at when you begin your journey on the cloud is starting out on your left-hand part where I talk about the cloud roadmap. And when you order what you're going to move up into Azure and in what order, it comes down to be business value first. You want to look at what are your drivers: globalization, data consistency. Do you have too many disparate databases because of the ability for people to access them? One way is putting it up in the cloud. Then there's a number of use case scenarios for that. Accessibility, again, I just talked about accessibility. Operational optimization. You no longer have the hardware to deal with, of course, and you've probably all heard that spiel before. But scalability, scalability is the ability to very easily change your SKUs as far as the power of your machine, whether it be memory, whether it be disk access, whether it be CPU, you scale that up on demand. And then also scaling out, the ability to have what we talk about availability sets. So if you wanted to increase the number of your servers or decrease them very quickly, you can do that as well too. And that's another business driver for scalability. And then periodic consumption. You may have something that you stand up if say you're into taxes and you only have a demand at a certain time of year. You can base your consumption on that and use it and get rid of it. And so really handy for that without having to own the hardware. And then also rapid response to business needs. If you need something really quick, you can have it very, very quick without having to look at all of the capital and such. And then typically the next stop in the route is migrate and lift and shift. And oftentimes, your line of business applications have certain dependencies, server dependencies, Windows authentication, Active Directory, whatever it may be. It's oftentimes very easy to just do a lift and shift with your line of business applications and get them up in Azure. And databases, websites, interactions, and middleware. And what in the first bubble, going back to the cloud roadmap, this really ties into cloud enablers. When you're taking a look at your workloads, you want to take a look at, well, for one, I have to get familiar with the Azure cloud, see how it's going to work and that sort of stuff. So really look at your low-hanging fruit and applications that don't have dependencies on other applications or databases, etc. If they're just cloud enabled, really look at those low-hanging fruit pieces and get them moved up to Azure. Cloud enablers. That's another thing too. Take a look at your enablers. Maybe it's a database that all of your applications are dependent on. You may want to to replicate a SQL database up into Azure. So it's handy there with your on-premise database, and then move some of your non-real-time applications up into Azure as well to take a look at that database if it's transactional. Again, whether it's transactional or whether it's a data warehouse, it all has bearings on enablement and what you may need to do for the actual migration. Once you've done your lift and shift, we go into optimize and modernize, and it's debatable which would be in the modernize bubble and which would be in the optimize bubble, depending if you're doing application development or it's mainly, say, off-the-shelf applications. And so optimize, you know, once you get your things up and running in Azure, then you can tune them, because oftentimes virtual machines in Azure and virtual machines on premise require different horsepower, and most of the time in Azure it requires less. And so you'll be able to tune and cost optimize these. You'll be able to take advantage of ASR and backups. You can do that on premise as well too. Your databases, migrate to Azure SQL database. And by the way, I'll be doing a demo on Azure SQL migration right after I get to these slides. And then Azure Files, using Azure Files rather than file servers. Active Directory domain services. If you have the need to have a domain server, you may want to look at offloading that to domain services and trying that and seeing how it works out. And then also Azure Active Directory. And so there's just a lot. And in modernization, these are more born into cloud applications. These are things that you would either utilize in the SaaS, or you would rewrite or refactor your applications. And Azure Function Apps for serverless compute, along with Logic Apps. That's also, they go hand in hand for workflow. Azure Web Apps, container services to totally utilize your hardware out there and optimize your investment as far as what it costs to run up in the cloud. API apps, and then again, if you ditch those Exchange servers, get on Office 365. Another great modernization area. I'm sure you're very familiar with Dynamics, artificial intelligence, which is very accessible nowadays and very handy for applications. And then Power BI for reporting and any instrumentation you may need to build. Okay, we offer at Microsoft a number of tools to help you on your migration journey. We have Azure Migrate, which is really focused VMware, vSphere, on-premise implementations, and it'll allow you to, gives you tooling to move those up into Azure. We also have an Azure database migration service, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. And that is a really good tool for migrating Microsoft SQL Server databases into Azure SQL database, which is a service. We have cost management tools to help you tune your applications so it's within the boundaries of what you can afford. We have site recovery, and again, that for disaster recovery, great tool, but also like Azure Migrate, you can take just a number of workloads, do a test recovery up into Azure, and you have then essentially done a migration where you can start seeing how your IaaS implementation or your on-site implementation would work up in Azure. We also have Azure Data Box, which is a solution for if you have large amounts of data, files, whatever it may be, dumps, and you want to get these off-premise and you want to get them into Azure, but it's just not feasible to do it across the line. We have hardware that you can ship up and back and to get your data up into Azure. Okay. Okay, here's our scenario for today. SQL database migration optimization. We start out with, you have an Azure with, an on-premise server farm, which you have databases, a lot of databases out there. One path is to then migrate those to Azure virtual machines and IaaS environments. So you've essentially just taken your servers that were on-premise and moving them into Azure. But now you can have availability sets, allow you to scale out and to be able to have better performance, and also to be able to have redundancy in case, for maintenance in any kind of outages you may have. And then from there, another step could be then, okay, we're up in Azure, it's all working fine, the cloud, networking's working, everything is working fine. We're ready to make the next step, the Azure SQL database. And as it will be showing today. And there's also the other more bold and simplified approach is just go from on-premise farm straight to Azure SQL database. You can go either direction, just depends on what your requirements are and the complexity of your applications. Okay, the tools and services that we offer for data migration is we have a data migration assistant, and that runs on your network where your databases lie. It can run on the database server or preferably another machine. And what this will do is it will validate your Azure SQL compatibility, and it will also clone your SQL Server schema to the Azure SQL database. And this is part of the migration process. And then on the Azure side, we have an Azure Database Migration Service. And once you've cloned your schema across, what this does is it will handle doing large amounts of data transfer, and it will migrate your SQL Server data to your Azure SQL database instance. All right. It's demo time. Let me escape out of here for you, and we'll move to the demo. Hold on one moment.
One of the things we had talked about before too, Rich, is as you're setting up the demo is, in lift and shift strategies, we go through this a lot with customers, and the place where normally people feel is like, well, I have all these things, can I just take it all and stick it in the Azure and stick it in Azure? And I'll say most of the time, unless you're using something really old, like you have some Windows NT4 servers out there, you probably should let that die somewhere. But you don't necessarily want to just copy paste everything up into the cloud. That's because right now you might have some domain controllers that are running 2008 R2. It's older. The nice thing with Active Directory is just build a new one, running Windows Server 2016 or even soon 2019. Put in Azure, because they're multi-masters, which means they all essentially have the same kind of copy of information with some special roles that you can move. Let all that data move up, kill your old box. The other reason is not just to be on the newer thing, but a lot of times you have a lot of old things hanging on there, other pieces of software that you don't need. You probably broke, you patched, and you have kind of a lot of this old thing. So start fresh. So that's domain controllers. I also say the same thing around file servers, right? If you still need that file server, if you haven't been able to move it all to Office 365 or move it all to something else, and you still need those kind of raw files accessible via, the UNC Pass and all that, same thing. Build a new box up there or boxes, copy it over, because then you have the opportunity to also change your disk structure and performance structure. So, that's kind of planning out that part of the migration. And in this example, where I may not want to just lift and shift the whole VM, but I do want to take my data with me, but leverage either what's in a new VM for SQL, or I want to use the SQL service, you kind of get that opportunity to make a fresh change versus just copy, one thing to the other. The last area, which is certain line of business applications, which have sometimes very good reasons, like this license is tied to this install, and we don't want to buy it again, or we can't find it again. You bet, right? We have to move those things, or other kind of customized versions in the VM. Other than that, it's still lift and shift if you think of it from a data perspective, not all at the VM perspective. So taking that context into the SQL migration, that's like, oh, well, we can move it to something that's not just the same, but maybe better for us in what we're doing. So anyway, thought I'd add that in as you got the demo, and I can see it and looks good.
Okay, great. What I've done in the interest of time is I pre-provisioned the services that we would need for the demo. Don't let this look too intimidating to you. It's really very easy. All I did is provision this Azure database migration service, filled out a few blanks, and it created all this other information around it. Azure database migration services it needs to be on the same network as your SQL Server. And so whether the SQL Server is in Azure, or if you have a VPN connection to hybrid connection to your on-premise, this can be achieved either way. You can gain visibility to your servers. I also created an IaaS environment out here where I have a SQL Server running, which again is the one that I'm going to migrate. It's in Azure on this one, which is showing that very incremental approach to migration. And then for Azure SQL, I created an Azure SQL database, and I'm going to open that right now for you to see. Actually, I think I've got it open right over here. Right now, you can see under tables, if I were to run anything from this query from systables, you can see nothing's in there right now at this point. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the virtual machine that's housing my SQL Server. What I did is I put the migration assistant right on my SQL Server just for this demo, again in the production instance. Is probably not something you would want to do. You never want to pollute your production servers with anything, but I did it. Okay, and so in the assessment, we selected some data sources. In the interest of time and typos and demo problems, I just already plugged into my SQL Server, which is right here, and I ran a assessment. They're very easy to do. You just come through, you select your data source, and you just run your assessment, and up it comes. And you can see right here in my assessment right here, it comes up with some recommendations talking about things to do with reporting services, and another thing having to do with trace flags. Again, nothing that would be alarming or would be a showstopper in a migration. And for compatibility issues, it came up with none. So there's just absolutely nothing. So it looked for 140 different use cases for compatibility here and found 0, and 30 here, it found 0. And so just absolutely no compatibility issues. Okay, and then over on this side, again, the way this works is that you select your data sources, and this would be your source, which should be your SQL Server, and your target, which would be your Azure SQL database. I've already done that. You can see them right here. My source database is my demo DB, and it's sitting on this SQL Server. My target database is this Azure database you see right here. And so I've already pre-filled those just to get around typos and things. So right now what we're doing is we're selecting the objects that we'd like to migrate. And I've created a couple tables out there which I have pre-populated with on my SQL database, which I pre-populated with public domain medical disease information, just to get a lot of rows and diverse columns and things like that. And that way, you know, would show the compatibility that most of the time, if it's running successfully on your SQL Server, it's going to run successfully in Azure, unless you've done something a little funny or obscure. Okay, and so what we'll do now is we'll click this button here, and we'll say Generate SQL Script. And it creates a SQL script that would actually create your schema in your Azure in Azure SQL. And as you know, when I just went over to when I showed you the Azure SQL database, there was no tables in it, and no tables, no rows. And so let's just say deploy schema. Just like that, it ran. And I'm going to now minimize this, and remember over here where I showed nothing, I'm going to refresh this, and oh, look, here they are. And I'll run that too. And you can see there's my tables. Okay, so it created those in Azure SQL just like that. Really easy. And then I'm going to select asterisk from dbo.demo1. And run that query. And aha, there's no rows. Okay, so that's where we get into the second part of our demo here. Now that we've actually created the schema, we would come over here into this wizard right here. And this is where we're going to do our actual data transfer. And I have a project on here. I want to delete this project. This is one from when I was testing this. And we call this MP1. Okay, and delete. Okay, now I'm going to say a new migration project. We'll just call this MP2. And that's, okay, that's a migration project. And I'm going to say my source SQL, let me get myself set up completely for demo mode here. All right, because I'm going to be doing some cutting and pasting. Here's my project name. My server type is a SQL server, that's on-prem or in Azure. And my target server is going to be an Azure SQL database. I'm going to do an offline data migration. And by doing offline, what it does is it gives you the choice to pull your databases offline during the migration. So it would give you a clean transition from on-prem to the cloud. And then we're going to create the activity. It's going to run me through a number of questions here. It wants to know what my SQL Server name is for my source. Hold on. We'll type that in right here. And we're going to use, I'll use this just for fun. I set them both up. And the password. Now, on this test machine I made, the SQL Server, I never installed a certificate. And so if you're just testing or you don't have a certificate on your server, all you do is click this box and to make it work. Okay, it connected. And so now you want to go to your target server name, and I just happen to have that in my little notepad here too. So let me plug that in. And we'll do SQL authentication again. And I'm going to encrypt my connection. This isn't going externally, but why not? Oh, failed to connect. SQL authentication. Let's try it again. Spell right. All right. Now you select the database that you want to migrate. Select the target database, which is SQL here. And I'm not going to set the database into read only when I'm done because this is just a test. Here's the two tables. It automatically selected them for me. Selected all, which is the demo 1, the demo 2, which are in my source database. Then it wants an activity. And I'm going to say, go do it now, please. And we're going to run the migration. Oops. I always have to click this. Let's do refresh. And it's completed. Okay, so now let's proof of the pudding here. Let's go back into Azure. And take a look at that query editor and select asterisk from demo 1, run. And we have rows. Let me shrink this down a little bit for you.
Nice.
As you can see, we have a whole lot of rows in there, all kinds of disease information. And so that's how easy it is to migrate a database. Now, what this does, you can migrate data using the assistant over to Azure, but what it's not going to give you is a lot of the retry logic and things like that. So if you're dealing with a lot of data and something causes something to fail, you might have to start all over again with using the assistant. But using this tool, it's really good for large amounts of data. And migrating them. So it will even, if you tell it to, it'll even do a database consistency check after, like a DBCC check DB and things, all of those things that would go into consistency check at the end of the migration for you, which is to optimize your database, which is really nice. So that's it for the demo. Let me go back to my PowerPoint just for a moment.
One thing, anytime you're looking to, whenever you're sending a large amount of data over a network, something that just seems so small but so important is, if you're going to test this out and you have a lot of data, you're going to push up there and you're like, hey, I'm just pushing on my data, not impacting my application, so it'll be fine. You can do that, but if you absorb all your uplink from, moving from your office up into the cloud, so at your ISP, if you absorb all your uplink, it affects your downlink too. So if you're doing this in the middle of the day, just pushing up a bunch of data, everybody will say, hey, why is download so slow? And you say, well, I'm just uploading. Downloads can't happen without a clear uplink because that's the way networks work. So just a moment of caution before you just start firing away at this thing.
Yeah, and this is Microsoft has done a really good job at making this simple. As you can see,
Yep.
I used the Azure portal and I used an analysis tool. We didn't install an agent on the SQL Server or any of that kind of funny business. And so it's just very, very simple to use for anybody to use and gets a lot of things done in the background. We have a lot of good videos and such on Channel 9, etc. I've given some highlight links here for you for migration, which we can share, and Conrad can share after this as well too, and as well as some great books. And if you want to look ahead and what does this whole container mean to me in modernization, and how do I do it? How do I make these steps? If you're doing development, there's just some really great books that you can go out and access. Okay, and they're free books. So that concludes my demo today for SQL data migration. If you have any interest in any other parts of Azure SQL Database, let Conrad know, and we'll see what we can do in the future for you for our presentations. We're getting some help out.